Let's go ahead and get started. I got 10:04.
On front.
Today's workshop is discussion regarding the reclassification policy. During the recent budget and budget hearings, reclassifications came up. During the course of the department head meetings, it came up. So there was no way that we could get this looked at in any kind of detail before this budget we're in now. But I did promise that we would look at it afterwards. So that's what we're here for today, is to look at the reclassification policy, and if there's a way we can make anything better, make it easier. I also want to take the opportunity to kind of dispel some things with reclassification. Everybody here has probably heard this, but it's worth repeating. Reclassification is just what it says it is. Reclassification is a change in job duties that has a resulting change in pay. This can be up or down. It is not a raise system. It is not designed to be a raise system. This is strictly a reclassification based on a different group of criteria for a particular position. It's also not designed to address a specific person, although sometimes that happens. It's designed just to be a reclassification. And we want to make sure that we use it for the purpose that it's intended. Having said that, how we do it is, well, it's up to us within the lines of the law how we do it. So we're looking today, is there a way to make our reclassification system different, better, something that people would prefer to use? I'm open to all suggestions. Before we get started, Ms. Hardwine, would you, by policy, go over how it is set now?
The reclassification is not its own policy. It's really under policy number 240, which is the pay matrix compensation program. Currently, the policy states any department head or elected official may submit reclassifications to the Human Resources Department beginning June 1st of each year through June 30th. The reclassification should consist of a copy of the position's current job description and the new job description to include the specific changes that justify the reclassification. The Human Resources Department will submit the reclassifications to Commissioners Court for final approval and adoption. All changes for reclassification should be effective upon fiscal year and budgeted for such changes. I've gone back. This part of the policy was revised on June 21st of 2016. This is how long this part of the policy has been in effect. Prior to that, I have what it read prior to that, if you want to know what the prior policy was. And I believe this was from 2012, or no, 2007. County Personnel Director, County Auditor, and Chief Civil Attorney, acting as county liaison, along with 3 members from the community, will form a committee to hear recommendations from elected officials and department heads. No reclassification shall be considered without the approval of the Reclassification Committee. The Reclassification Committee will recommend its finding to Commissioners Court for final approval and adoption. All changes for
Hang on one second. Okay. She's quoting the former policy. That's why you're not seeing it. I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, so and it's the same. All changes for reclassification should be effective upon fiscal year and budget for such changes. That was what was the original policy prior to what we're doing currently.
And also, Lori, when I was looking at this stuff, there was a couple of things, and it's because we made the changes in the pay matrix with the raises and stuff a couple years ago, or a year ago. So we had the levels for the Orange County employees pay matrix number C. Letter C, because we eliminated and added.
Right. I was going to after we discussed the reclassification portion, I was going to ask that we change that levels and add the 20 year to it.
Okay. Well, hadn't we've already done that? So can't you just put it in the? Because we have it there, and then again on the procedure, A1 is the same thing. It just doesn't have the right information.
So whatever happens in here today, I'll rewrite all of that and bring it to court for y'all's approval.
Okay. I just wanted that update showing those changes we made last year.
Okay. Does anybody have anything that they would want to address with regards to reclassification? Any department heads? Any Commissioners Court? I'll get the ball rolling. The one thing that I saw that I talked about before is we do have, the reason June 30th is on there is we do have, for budgetary reasons, to get this done at a certain point so we can account for it for the next year's budget. However, I do think that 30 days tends to kind of lump everything together real quick, and we end up with a bunch of reclassification hearings kind of in a hurry. So perhaps maybe move it back, give it an extra 30 days, start it in May 1st. That's just a suggestion. You can give us 60 days worth of time to look at reclasses.
I don't think it says
Or do you
we
want
have
to look at revamping
address
the whole
them.
thing?
I don't think it says we have to address them then, they just have to have applications in.
Shouldn't take long.
We can address them.
Well, she gives a start date. You can't turn them in before June 1, and we don't address them until the department heads turn them in. So it kind of necks us down to about a month where we can look at reclasses on the court.
I don't normally bring them to the court until after June 30th because
So we're in July, and then we're limited by the budget on the
I don't bring
tail
them until
end.
July, to be sure.
If we started them a little bit earlier, maybe give people a little bit more time, and we could actually start looking at them as you get them in. I'm just trying to make it to where we're not feeling cramped. But again, we can look at that. We can look at revamping the whole policy. That's why we're here today, is to look at how you guys want to do it.
Well, I don't have an issue with if we wanted to change the 30 days to give us a 60-day window to go to
May
May
1.
1st. I mean, I think that would be adequate time for everybody to do it and adequate time for us to review them. So I wouldn't have an issue with the change in the May 1st. You see anything with that, Lori?
I know we get real busy sometimes. Sheriff, if you don't mind, there was an example this year from your office. If we did have the 60 days, sometimes it's easier to catch. We had actually gone past the deadline of June 30th on one of yours, and in the DA's office as well. And I had to tell both of them, I'm sorry, you're past the deadline. So they weren't allowed to turn in those reclasses. If we had 60 days and maybe send out a reminder, and I think we did this year, but send out a reminder in May or late April, hey, look, get them in. We won't accidentally forget anybody.
Yeah, I don't think we can go. I think it'd be difficult for us to go any later because of the budget deal. But we could. Like I said, I don't think it would be an issue going forward.
Before we get into that, is there anybody that's got any concerns about how the reclassification hearings and the procedures are actually done? She read the previous policy as well as the current policy. Is there anybody that would like to address the policy in general? No? All right. If you do, step up here so that she can record you.
I know that in 2012 there was a change made, but I've been here for 32 years. Over the period prior to that, I've called around to numerous counties and to the plants and some of the entities around here. The county is a very different entity, kind of like the plants in some of the counties, where it's kind of like you have a bunch of CEOs within an entity. We've all discussed that really no one knows what each department does. I'd be the first to admit I have no clue what other departments do. I know what mine does. Prior to us going to this type of deal, whether it was a committee and I think even in the committee, I thought that the department head got to be there. I could be incorrect on that. Or even this.
Could you speak up just a little bit? I'm just having a little trouble hearing you.
We used to, it also helped the court in the situation where you weren't cramming them all in at one time. It was a part of our regular budget hearing. We submitted it with our budget requests. And then when we had our budget hearings, we had requests for employees and or requests for reclassifications. We were able at that point in time to point out what the additions or changes to the positions were. For example, my office absorbed another office. Some would say that office didn't do anything. Well, that office has now been legislated to do numerous things since 2015 when I took it over. And I could get all the documentation needed for that. I haven't had the opportunity to be able to do that. There's been several things. It's very difficult in a small window of opportunity to do that. We do get busy, and with the responsibilities that we're doing. It's difficult to come. I don't come to Commissioners Court during budget time. I don't come unless I have something on the agenda that pertains to me specifically or for my budget hearing. And so as to cut down on as many times as we may have to come or to spend a day sitting and listening to everyone's reasons why they want their employees reclassified, it would be nice if they could just be put with our budget hearings. And as elected officials, we could present that. The HR departments in the plants and in the other counties do not have anything to do with reclassifications at all. Reviewing them, putting them together, they simply get, if the CEO or whoever, the department manager meets with the person, decides the job has changed, then it goes, that information, if they decide that it needs to be reclassified, goes to the HR department and they implement the reclassification. They don't sit and go through what about the job description has changed or not changed and make a chart and all that. They said that their department is primarily there for benefits, signing up new hires, going out for bids on insurance and things like that. But as far as dealing with employees who are under an umbrella of either another department or a manager or whatever you want to call them, they would not be the ones to review those job descriptions. Now, the job descriptions are on file in there, which come from those departments. So that was the only suggestion that I had hoped maybe we could consider. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way, but I don't even come to Commissioners Court on a regular basis, with much less budget time, unless I absolutely have something on the agenda. I feel like in sorting through what is on a job description or a new job description, we are going to be the best person to answer the questions for you all. We're going to be the best person to know if it is something new that hasn't been done, as opposed to just more of something. And I don't know about anybody else, but my time is just very precious. I mean, we're shorthanded, and time is definitely an issue. So I felt like it would be something that would prevent one less day of budget hearings for me as a department head.
Do you keep current standard positions, their job duties, a description of the positions that you have for your office?
We had them, but I would definitely say that they were old, because I've tried to update them as much as I can, because I think when we last had to really kind of get them together was when they implemented that matrix, which was in '07, which is to me, very outdated. And I worked on a couple of them here recently, and then there was a reclassification granted and then rescinded, and so I have not worked on the entire office.
Because you bring up an interesting point, and I would like to see this if we go forward. Whenever a reclassification request is made, whatever policy we use, whatever form we use to have that hearing during budget or whatever, I'd like to have a standardized, this is the job description as it sits. This is a written job description as to what it's going to be. So the court can easily determine, okay, these are the differences, and make the decision a whole lot better, determine whether or not there is indeed a justifiable difference to change the pay and to move something on the matrix. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, it came up in court. We might even need a job title if it's so different that it doesn't even fit in the job titles we had before. Clark, I think you had one like that. And it took a lot of extra time. If the department heads want to do that, that would be very helpful for reclassification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes that may be the case, that it is a completely different job title. Excuse me. And sometimes it is the situation to where they are still doing all of the job duties that they have done all along, but then there have been numerous jobs added to their already existing job duties, which is a phrase that I use even when I interview people. You do understand this is the scope of the job at this time, but because we are governed by legislation and the Supreme Court, these change every other year. So, are you going to be okay with adding job duties to your already existing job duties when I cannot assure you that you will get any additional pay? Honest with them up front. Well, they're all going to say yes at the time, of course, but as they find out more and more exactly how much that is that's mandated, that's when the going gets rough.
So you would recommend that all the department heads keep a written, standardized job description for each of the positions that they supervise?
No, I'm speaking for myself. I think that we were asked to do that back some time ago. It would be nice if we would have a template of some time, something to go by. I think that some counties have some out there, and they've been helpful. However, you can find yourself writing a book if you're not careful. So, that I think, you have to be very careful on that, because it's kind of like, where do you stop? How much detail do you want? You want a 5-page job description that details because I think that's sometimes how you kind of feel you need to be to point out all of this, rather than to be able to say, we've had all of these additional duties added. We took on this office. There's, now we're supervising all of this. There's been no, these people have now had to take on these duties. We start feeling like we have to start listing. What does that mean when we took on this?
Okay. Okay. Any questions?
No, I mean, to your point, I looked at some of Jefferson County's job descriptions, and they're quite lengthy to try to cover up. Now, I don't know who wrote them. I don't know if it was the department heads who wrote them. I don't know if their human resources department over there wrote theirs, or if they took it from somebody else. But they're very lengthy descriptions about the jobs that they have, and basically it kind of looked like to me they're just making sure that they're covering everything with a statement, instead of just saying what you said is that it could change as we move forward in the year because of legislation. So, I agree with you. To ask all of our all of our department heads and elected officials sit there and write their own job descriptions in detail. I will say that I think that some of the job descriptions that we have within our pay matrix now doesn't fit everybody. I think that we all would probably agree with that. But to go to actually have everybody write job descriptions in every different department out there would be an extremely time-consuming process for all of those folks.
I don't think no matter how hard you try that you're going to capture
You're not going to capture everything, but
That's why you have to catch all the others' duties as assigned.
Right, exactly.
yeah. And looking at this, I think that with 2-month window, is that effective? Is that a good enough time? Because we can't get too far, because then that's all we do. So, is a 2-month window a good enough time? If we extend that another 30 days, will that help you with the timing of being able to get those things turned in time to be able to?
But you're still asking me to write a job description, because there is a job description. You're asking me to write another one so that it shows the difference between what it was and what it is. So the labor intensiveness really isn't all that different.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we're going to change the labor intense part of it. We realize that there's some work going on when you're asking somebody when you're asking for more money for someone, you've got to take that step. I can take it from the private sector. Whenever we did, promotions or pay scale ranges, I had to write them up. I had to spend a lot of time to do that so I could justify why I was asking for more money. Yeah. I don't know that there's a better way to do that, because you have to justify it. We have to be able to justify it when we spend that money.
Well, that's a good point. And some added duties are still within your classification. Right. They might not have been enumerated in that job description, but they fall within the skill level that we expect from that classification. It's only those jobs that are above the classifications that they're currently listed at that we'd want to consider. So,
And I think you bring up a good point, is that, and from what he's saying, that's correct. I know it's labor intensive, but it's like you said, you know what your department does. I don't want to task HR, and I certainly don't want to task this court with writing job descriptions for people in your office or sheriff's deputies or road and bridge. So it's almost got to be the department head, because they're the only ones that can adequately write that out. Now, if we want to use the templates we have as a starting point, that would be fine, I would think. I agree with Commissioner Gauthier. I think there's no way you can get it all detailed to everything they do all day long. But whatever is written and whatever is presented for consideration by this court as to whether someone should be reclassified, that responsibility, I think, does fall on the department head. I just don't see a way around
and
that.
I think that, yeah, and to me, I think that part of the issue is the timing. So I think that by giving you an extra 30 days would help with that, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we have some other department heads in here, so tell me what you think, so that we can make sure that we give you enough time to work on that. Because at the end of the day, it's somebody's job, it's somebody's money that we're trying to, that we're trying to either benefit them or not, depending on whether it fits or not. But we have to, I want to be able to give people more time to be able to do that. But we still have to follow them with the restriction because we're still tied to a budget. Up here that we have to work with.
And if you're asking for reclassification, there has to be a justification.
Yeah.
And the department heads or elected officials are the only ones who are going to be able to do that.
Right. I think that I mean, that's y'all's decision, whatever you decide about the extra time.
And I don't know if, like I said, I think that whenever I look at the our sheet that we follow as far as the different levels, I do think there's some room for work in that. I don't know when the last time that was reviewed. To have changes made into that, because I do think that there are some job descriptions that don't fit that anymore. As legislation changes, so does, so it probably should our job descriptions at some point to tweak those different levels, but we still have to try to figure out a way to make sure that we're falling within some kind of a guideline. I mean,
Yeah, I think, I think that's how you do get into, though. I mean, I know the job descriptions in some of mine are pretty lengthy. I think that is how you continue to grow your job descriptions. That's just going to be how that is. It still doesn't address the fact that I personally, myself, and maybe everybody else has, doesn't mind, but it still doesn't address the issue that we're all going to be over here for almost a day listening to everyone else's need for reclassification and their whys, and I don't see, the use in that.
How long was our last reclassification hearing?
I've been.
Yeah, I would think that bumping it to 60 days as opposed to 30 days means maybe we could schedule them. Now, this would be kind of up to y'all, but schedule them where we only have, say,
A few at a time.
district clerks and county clerks today, instead of having,
Yeah, we could have
Three or
we
four
could have
today.
2 hearings and split it up however it works.
and that way you're not here at least too terribly long.
because how many total requests did we have this year? I forget.
We had 3 different departments.
Was it
Now, in
8?
that department, you had,
Yeah.
some had several, so it was 8 total, I think.
Yeah.
That was only a couple-hour hearing. I mean, it
Well,
wasn't a
and
little
you're
long.
probably not, truly, when you have a reclassification every year, I don't know that that's our goal.
No.
To have, a bunch every year. I don't know.
I can just base
And
it
then
on.
this year, it was only a morning workshop, and then that afternoon, I think, or we didn't vote that same day, I think it was.
Yeah, we voted
Yeah,
next
a
week.
couple weeks after that.
No, I'm just basing it on the last one that I came to, and there were numerous requests. And,
I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, we had 21 or something like that.
And we were here for
But
a
that
very
was,
long time.
and that was people, and several department heads admitted that it was just a way to get a raise, not necessarily a reclassification.
Yeah.
And now we've given the raise, so that pressure is off a little bit. So hopefully, like I say, true reclassifications should be the rarity.
Well, and I think that's the thing. That's where it falls to the department heads for sure, is that they've got to be, if you're going to come and ask for a change, that it should be a justifiable change. I mean, I'm not speaking, speaking to everybody. It should be a justifiable change, and then we don't have people that are just requesting money for the sake of money. It's got to be something that we can justify, that you can justify when you bring it to us. But I think as far as our hope is by giving, when I looked at it, I know that the timing, because I talked to several people, the timing was an issue. That it was too tight of a window. So if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I guess a couple elected officials have missed the deadline, so maybe by expanding it by that 30 days, we'll stop that from happening, make sure that we give everybody a chance to be heard.
Come on up.
I guess why a lot of these promotions and grade steps are given, what happens is the general people out there working in the county, they see somebody got a raise. They look at it as a raise. They don't look at it as a grade step. And then they look at what they do versus what the person who got the step does. And a lot of times, I mean, my job description changes every day. I mean, I'm either doing FEMA or I'm doing moving a house or I'm doing something that I don't do every day. And I'm just thinking that a lot of times that we get people out there, I mean, I have 50 people I have to be responsible for. Clark has 50 people he has to be responsible for. And no matter what them people do out there, we still the ones that are going to wind up being responsible. Then you look at people that got these grade steps that got moved up last year as well as this year are making as much money as I am. I've been here for 39 years, which don't make me make any more money. I'm just saying that if I'm responsible for 2 people, but I'm still getting $30-something an hour for doing it, I don't go down real well with the employees because the employees find out about it and they say, oh, well, so-and-so got it because they knew somebody. Or this got some favoritism because of something. You know, I'm not, and really it doesn't matter to me. I'm just telling y'all that that's why you wind up with all these reclassifications. Because they see one over here that's only over one thing, one person they're supervising. And then you have another who's over here that's having to keep up with 50 people's things, 50 people's times, and they're not recognized. And I just thought I needed to get that off my chest because that's where y'all are getting all these reclassification things. Because people get mad.
Yeah.
They say, this person's getting the money and I'm doing more than they are, but they're getting money up there for answering the phone, filing the fingernails, whatever it is they're doing.
Well, like
You
I
know,
said,
it don't matter to me. I'm just saying that that's what happens
And I
here.
know what you're talking
well,
about.
and
that's
I
where
think
it
that
comes
goes. And I think that goes back to the fact that we need to review probably the job descriptions that are on that
Of
sheet
everybody.
and of everybody. We need to look at those where those buckets fall because I don't think they fit everything anymore.
And I'm not standing up here because I'm going to tell you something. I'm not a greedy person. I ain't never asked for anything. I'm just saying that I'm thinking that if you promote these few over everybody, it creates resentment.
Well, and I think maybe a possible solution to what Mike's talking about is, you know, we have office managers. All office managers are office managers.
That's right.
Maybe we have office manager 1, office manager 2.
Yeah, I think that's
You know,
kind of the
and-
thing we have.
To take into account people that have more responsibility in addition to an office manager that has 2 people versus somebody that has 50.
Well, then again, I guess I'm human too, and when I feel like that somebody got as much money as I'm getting, and I'm not demeaning that person for getting the money, because I think that everybody needs more money. But when they only doing a couple of things, and I'm doing the world, and I'm getting the same pay they are,
Yeah.
that ain't right. I mean, that's just my opinion.
And as it's set up right now, there's no separate category to put
Well,
somebody like
but
that.
I do think there needs to be a reclassification, and they did do it here one time. Of course, Thibodeau was against it, but it kept a lot of good people here because we were vastly underpaid then. And when they did this study, they said, oh, well, yeah, y'all are. But I mean, I'm not, like I said, not sitting up here talking about myself. I'm just talking what people tell me. And that's what they say, you know? And that's all I got. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mike.
I think part of that issue we brought up is it's looked at as a raise more than a reclassification. And so the average person does see it as, well, that person got a raise, I
A
didn't get
step.
a raise.
Yeah, it's just not a
Yeah.
step, it's a reclassification. That's the,
Whether it be 30 days or 60 days, I can still forget. So, but I do appreciate that.
Sheriff, nobody said anybody's name.
I'm not going to forget next year. I done wrote it down for next year. So
I bet the
anyway,
employees will let you know now.
Yeah, I bet
just a couple things, and this is just my perspective from a few years being here, and this is not directed toward anybody for any reason or anything, but typically when you see more job reclassifications, it's the years that the employees go 1, 2, or 3 years without a raise. I've noticed that over the years. And after, I'm pretty known for taking notes, Laurie, from years back. And going back and looking at that, that's typically, I've noticed more reclassifications of years that employees don't get a raise. So that, just for what it's worth. So, but the reclassifications, the confusion, and Judge, you touched on it a while ago, about, we have a job classification for every employee at the sheriff's office. And we don't per se sit down every year and go over them. We do them as it comes up, or we tweak them as necessary, because you have to have a job classification if you're going to post that position, so someone knows exactly what they're applying for, so there's no questions down the line. And we do tweak them, quite often. So, but the confusion always comes in, to me anyway, is what constitutes a reclassification. I know we've gone through that many times in many workshops. What actually constitutes a reclassification? And we've gone through some of the stuff. Well, they've taken on more duties, they've done this, they've done that, in addition to what they've done. So, the part of looking at the job classification currently, and I was sitting there trying to think how that would work on giving the court another job classification. This is what they were doing, this is what they're doing now, and that's why I'm asking for that employee to be reclassified. We're really doing the same thing in a workshop when we get up here and try to spell it out, but it's hard to me, trying to put myself in y'all's position up there. It's kind of like who gets up and presents the best case. It's kind of like an attorney in a trial. We've all sat there and thought that person was guilty, but the jury found them innocent because someone presented a better case. And so it's just, and I don't know what the answer to that is. We have guidelines on how to reclassify people or what constitutes a reclassification. But just to give you an example, and I just thought of this, was we have a person over there that for years, and we've had a lot of changeover at the sheriff's office with employees, 30 some odd over the last several years that's come and gone. But we got a person that does public information requests. They was doing it 5 years ago, maybe not that particular person, but doing public information requests. They're still doing public information requests today, but they're doing probably 3 or 4 times the amount they were doing several years ago. They're still doing the public information requests. So, without looking at a number, saying, okay, well, they did, I don't know, just throw a number. They did 50 last year. Now they're doing 100. Does that, and I don't know, I'm just kind of asking here, does that constitute a job reclassification? Because they're doing twice the number, along with some other duties and stuff like that. And I don't know what really the answer is. There's no certain, okay, you got to follow this guideline, you have to meet this criteria and this criteria in order to qualify for a job reclassification. And I don't know if there is a such thing to be able to do that. So we're kind of right back to where we started from. We turn it in and write it up the best that we can. And the way I do it, and everyone probably does it pretty much the same, is every department head, let me back up, every division captain that's over that department in my agency, every year, when I don't forget, like I did this year, but they come to me and say, I'd like to reclassify an employee, and we look at it and we make a determination then whether we're going to proceed that forward to the court and take the court's time to review that. And I've turned some of them down over there, like, well, I don't think it really meets it. And if I don't think it meets it, well, I feel like the court's probably not. But the ones that do meet it, and then we go forward with it, over here. I'm not going to be the one up here explaining that job classification. I'm going to let the captain do it because he knows better, because that person works for him, and he knows a lot better than me getting up here and trying to play like a defense attorney and beat the other attorney. That's not the way to do it to me. So.
Well, that's a really good point. And if I can, because you said several things in there that made me think about how we can be more objective about these reclassifications. That's the whole point, is we want to be objective. We don't want to treat it like raises. We don't want to treat it like, well, who had the best argument. We want to treat it like, well, this one needs to be reclassed. So when I talk to you, I feel a little more comfortable as far as talking about job descriptions, because it's a job that I've had a little experience with. So from the sheriff's point of view, and just because somebody wears a uniform doesn't mean they're not doing a job just like anybody else. So from the sheriff's point of view, the uniformed officers over there that are doing a job, their job is spelled out to them. This is what you're going to be doing. Now, not everything. It's not that detailed. If it was, it'd take up this whole room. But it's spelled out to them, their general job duties, and of course, if their supervisor tells them to do X, and it's a lawful order, then they got to be doing X. The two things that caught my ear the most was, where do we draw the line when it's reclassification versus raise, or versus some other remedy. As far as volume, my attitude towards volume, and this is just an opinion, feel free, y'all, whatever, I don't know everything. But my opinion would be is when the volume of work increases to the point where you think somebody is being underpaid for doing what they're doing, I don't really think the remedy is a raise. At that point, the remedy is adding a person. Because if you hired somebody, like you were talking about, to do a particular job, and that was their full-time job 10 years ago, and now the volume is so increased that you feel like they're underpaid, probably the remedy isn't that they're underpaid, it's how on earth are they getting this job done? If it was full-time 10 years ago and it's tripled, I don't know how they're doing it. So we probably need to start looking at, we need to add a person, another person in another position.
Yeah.
The other thing was I'm sorry, real quick, just what you were talking about as far as where do you draw the line. When I think about this, I think about when they swore me in and handed me a nightstick, a gun, and some car keys and said, get after it. Over the years, they added a few things to that, as you're well aware, including tasers and OC spray and cameras. And all of these things require a bit of work, particularly cameras. But the job description is still the same. Keep the peace, protect lives and property, and enforce the laws of the state of Texas. Whenever they went beyond that, we need you to do investigative work as opposed to patrol work or something. That's where the reclass actually started. The fact I had a new tool on me that videoed this really didn't change what I'm doing. It was another responsibility I had, but it really didn't change what I was doing. And I think something like that, and again, I wouldn't know as well for the district clerk's office, but something like that where you look at, okay, you're still doing the same job, but you're using different tools to do it, probably isn't a reclass. Now, if you have different responsibilities and you're doing something that is different, for instance, we ended up hiring somebody whose whole job, I'm so glad they finally got rid of this, but at one time, because this person was overworked, the DA wanted up to 3 copies of everything. This was back in the olden days where it was actual videotape. And so I had to sit in there and they had to make copies, all for evidentiary purposes. So the defense attorney could get one in discovery, the district attorney could have one, and they could have one, the original that was locked down as the evidence, and keeping the chain of custody going. And so we ended up targeting one person 40 hours a week, and they still didn't have time to do it. Now that was a whole different job description. So I guess that would be an example of one where just going out and having a body cam, probably not. If you're tasked with making evidentiary tapes for district attorneys and defense attorneys, yeah, that's a new job description. Matter of fact, they ended up making it a whole new position. And then we got digital. We didn't have that person anymore. And those things are going to change. So I guess in the end, the answer is, like Vicki said, the department head knows what that department does. They do have to justify it to this court because we have to justify it to the budget and to the people that pay the bills. But if it's merely tools to do what we're already doing, different ways of organizing those tools, no. If it's increased volume of work, perhaps we need to look at adding somebody, not necessarily reclassing somebody. And if it's a change in what they actually do, now we have a reclassification. I don't know, maybe that doesn't help.
Well, you made my point about if it's too much work, another person may be required. But the one reclassification that really stands out in my mind that we've done in the past is someone was hired to answer the phone and file. Their job progressed to where they were turning in time, scheduling, ordering office supplies, actually office manager type duties. So to me, that's a clear cut. You're no longer just answering the phone and filing. You are now running an office. So it's a very distinct and real new set of responsibilities. So that's what you look at with reclassification. Again, if it's more work, then you're right. Maybe it's not reclassification. Maybe we need to get a part-time or another full-time person in there.
Well, another point is you can work below or at your classification. It could be new duties that fall within that application. It's when you're doing duties that fall in a classification above what you're working at is where the difference is. And so just adding duties alone, even though you may, all kinds of new duties going to be added, technology's probably changed what your guys do in the field night and day. So it's not just adding duties, because a lot of those duties will fall within the classification you're currently at. But it's when you might ask one of your officers to do stuff that's the classification above what he's classified at, or any one of your clerks classified above that. That's when you need to look at classification. They're doing work above their classification is what we have to look at. So, and what I hate about it is when we turn one down, I know the employee gets upset because they don't think they're valued, and it has nothing to do with that. It's looking at the duties and what they fit in, and I know it's probably my least favorite thing to do up here, especially when you have to turn one down. I hate it because we value all our employees, and we've turned down some very good employees, and it had nothing to do with how we value them, because they're great employees. It just didn't fit within the guidelines of reclassification.
Well, and to that point, the guidelines may need to be updated.
Yes.
Because the thing about it is I think that none of us want to get into, and I think somebody said it earlier, I'd have to go back, and I think it was the judge actually talking about that some of these things were done in the past because of favoritism or whatever the deal is. I think we're all trying to stay within that bucket of what that sheet says right now, and that's why we've had to turn down some of them, because it just didn't fit it. But where do you go that you don't take that step away that says that now that it's all going to be objective, left up to who's favorites and who's not? We have to have a guide, and if the guide needs to be updated, then we need to update the guide. But you have to have a guide, otherwise then it becomes objective to whoever's listening to it. And you're exactly right. I mean, I sat through a long time, a lot of years of management interviews and pay scale interviews and all that kind of stuff, and it got to the point was who was the best salesperson when they stood up there to present to the group that was looking at doing a pay scale raise or a job description raise. And some people were really good at it, and some people weren't. But their people were just as good, and so we used to kind of joke around all the time. You hate to have a manager that doesn't know how to sell something, because that was the only way that people got their step raises, where I came from. So you liked having a good manager that knew how to sell, because without it you were in trouble. But again, we would always have to fall back to the fact when we were looking at it on the review board, we had a guide that we had to follow, and without that guide, then some people that probably shouldn't have got one would have got one, and some people that deserved one wouldn't have got it. So, because we had a guide, and so if you had a bad salesperson that stood up in front of the group and said, "Hey, I've got a person, they really deserve it, and I don't really have a whole lot of backup," we could go back and get some. We had some questions we could ask to people and say, "Hey, well, this is what it is," because you're right. I mean, Vicki said it, and I know you said, we don't know what your people do, okay? But we know that there's a description of what they do that's out there currently, and if that description needs to be updated, we need to update it. But because that's the only thing that we have to go by when y'all come up and bring it to us that says that you need it. I mean, I think we all want to pay people what they're worth. We want to give them their value, but I'm telling you, we have to have a guide. If we don't have a guide, there's no way to monitor it. There's no way to justify what we're doing. I know that to the person that you're talking about and that we had to turn down is that I'd like to see that change for that case. And in the case of Mike, the same thing. We just aren't fitting it right, and it just needs to be updated. And to me, that's part of the biggest problem, because we don't want it to become a raise. It should be a true job classification. Just because workload has changed, I'm doing 50 cases as opposed to 75 now, but it's still the same job. You're just doing more of it. To your point, Judge, that's we may need another person there. But if you're doing a 50, and then all of a sudden now you're doing, I don't know, whatever it is, something different, but you're doing a civil case for another judge that needs some help on that, and ask one of your people to go do and work on this too. Now that would need to be a classification change. I know that with yours, Vicki, is a little different because of the stuff that you have to deal with the state. and we see some of those changes most of the time when you tell us, but most of that stuff we don't know, until it is. And some of it's going to fit within the same job description that's there currently, but sometimes it might change. I mean, technology is one of the biggest things. When I first started in a job a long time ago, as I'm sure the sheriff and you did, is a computer didn't exist, and now every sheriff's car out there has a computer sitting in a car. That doesn't mean it's a job classification change. It just means it's a different type of workload that they're doing. Like I said, we've got to have that guide that we can fall into, and otherwise there's no way to determine it, especially when we have to budget and keep it within a certain number that we have to manage that money. So that's to me. I want to see us make a change on the window, and hopefully that, if you're like me, Sheriff, I've tied string around my finger and then forget what I tied string around the finger for. So, I got to have somebody help me remember those kind of things and send out notifications, and maybe we can do more notifications of when that window is so that people are aware of it. But I'd also like to, at some point, sit down and look at maybe the buckets that we have to work with on these job classifications and see if there's some additions that we can put in there. Maybe there's some stuff we need to remove, but to me, that's probably where the next step would be. Yes, ma'am.
Come on up.
I agree. I think a lot of the things that are being said are good, but I think where the difficulty comes in for us is, when a lot of the people were hired in my office, yes, technology has become a big part of it. You're right, and that just becomes a part of the job. What wasn't a part of the job is the fact that, let's say we have 7 softwares we use. Well, we didn't know that 5 of those 7 softwares, we were going to have to be the ones who implement them. We were going to have to be the ones who are the managers of them. We are the ones who have to do all of the, turn in all the help desk, and then get on the computer and do the turbo calls and the go-to meetings and work on it with the software companies. These are the kinds of things it's difficult to address that in a job description and really break it down and try to explain it. And I think sometimes that's what I know my frustration is in trying to put that into some type of words. That's an IT person. That's what the people in my office have become. Using technology is one thing. Using a computer because it's part of your job is one thing. And yes, it needs to be done at my office level. Could the MIS department handle that? No. I mean, if every department in here has 7 softwares and they had to manage them all, it would be an impossibility. I understand that. That's not because someone's not doing their job. It's because, but to think that when that person was hired, they were ever told that they were going to be an IT person or that I was going to be an IT person. Now, mine just falls into the sundry of things that I do. So, that's the kind of things that I think when we put on there, about these softwares and all, it's very hard in a job description to start breaking all that down and talking about it. And I think sometimes it's seen, that's just part of the job, part of what they have to do the job. Yes, it may be part of what we have to do the job, but that's a huge change in responsibility. It's a lot of work. We have we have learned how to program. We have learned how to do things that we never would have thought we had to do. So it's in trying sometimes, I think, to convey and then, and to cover everything. And I think that's where the job descriptions begin to grow. I mean, it's hard. And then saying that we have so much of that now, I could have 2 full-time people taking care of just that. I've been begging for people for, I can't tell you how many years. That is an answer, a very good answer. Is that going to happen any more than a reclassification? Probably not. Due to budget constraints, I know y'all would love to give me people, but, I think that's a great answer, but it isn't an answer. So
does the increase, and I'd ask this of you, but also anybody, any of the other department heads here, when we talk about these changes, particularly in technology, the idea, theoretically, and you're going to have to understand, I am technophobic, I'm telling you. So just take this for what it's worth. It's just a question. But isn't the idea of technology to make the job easier?
Well, you would think, but it doesn't.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, laughter out there.
Well,
in our line of work, technology normally means covering yourself and covering the county, but along with technology comes reporting requirements.
Yes,
So that's what you
exactly.
said a while ago.
Right.
Having cameras. Yeah, it's a good tool to use, but now you have to do reports, and you've got to do other stuff based off of this, which is work that normally you probably would have done anyway, just would have written a report without a camera. But
Right.
it brings along more requirements. So at some points, technology does make it easier on computer work, where everything goes into a certain file or recording or something like that. But normally, in the end, it creates more work. And with that being said, I was going to say this, I'll just say it now and hush up. And I'm sure all of y'all know this. There's going to come a point in time, real soon in the near future in Orange County, where we're going to have to add employees. Reclassifications are great and all that kind of stuff. Money's a motivator to people. That's the easiest motivator you can get people to do, is just give them more money and they'll do anything. But at some point, they can't do their job regardless if you give them $100 an hour. They still can't do their job. And the county workforce has decreased over the years, and I'm speaking for my agents, my department, along with the rest of them also. And it's just not a reclassification, and you're right. Maybe reclassification, maybe we have to add an employee to be able to do this work. But there again, look at the flip side of that. Everything good has a bad. If you do that, but then what about the ones that you reclassified, a year or two before? By doing that work, now you hire another employee. And so their reclassification is going to stay the same where they're at.
And
now they may be doing less work.
Well, and let me add to that something that I want everybody in this room to understand as we go forward, because you're touching on a subject that I want to remind everybody of. When you work it doesn't matter where you work. If person A and person B are doing the same job and they're paying person A more because of race, religion, color, whatever, that's illegal. You can't do that. However, in private industry, if person A is deserving of a raise because they're doing a better job, that's perfectly okay. Private money is what drives a private industry, and they don't have the restrictions that we do, which brings us to us. We are paying people with taxpayer dollars. And Denise, help me out here, because this is definitely you're smarter than I am, and this is a legal issue. But we don't have the latitude that private industry has. We don't have the latitude to say, well, you're doing a better job than you're doing because of these progress reports here, so we're going to give you a raise, but not you, but you're classified as the same job. We are limited on what we can do, which is why we tend to do raises as group things. Now, we can say, you're doing a better job, we want you to supervise the other three people that are doing that. But we're limited on, I didn't say we couldn't do it, I said we're limited on how we do this. The justification is very strong to be able to say, let's take two deputies, for instance. They're both deputy 1. And they both have 5 years. And they both have exactly the same certifications. Justifying paying one more than the other, how would you go about doing that?
The way it's set up, we can't.
But
those limits we put on ourselves.
yeah, we put it, and that's
Because
you
there
put it
are-
there.
But there are reasons we did that.
Well, but to say
prevent abuse.
But there are counties, and we could do
Yes.
this. Clark, here's your payroll budget.
Yes.
You go and you pay your
Exactly.
people what you think they're worth.
And
Yeah,
we
and
did
that
that.
But we
Right.
would have to
Right.
change
Yeah.
that here.
We
Well,
did that
that's what
at
I
one
said, the limits
time.
are-
They
are-
budgeted our money. We
And
did that
I
to
think
people.
that there are some things that we would have to address, legal issues we'd have to address to do that. But that's a huge paradigm
Well,
change.
we used to do that.
Not
It's a
saying we
big change.
can't do it, but it's a
to
big change.
Mike's point earlier, there was a lot of favorites this,
Right.
people
Well,
get
it
more,
brings
and that's
in-
why the pay matrix came into effect
That's
to
right.
begin with, because we were doing it that way,
Well,
and there were a lot of issues.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
Right.
that's the thing. Is
Exactly.
It,
And that's what I'm getting at is we need to bear that in mind when we do this, because when we start talking about raises, we need to be able to justify a raise for a particular reason within the rules that we put on ourselves with the pay matrix. And Lori and I had this discussion some time ago, because back then, when we were paying based on what was considered merit, then it became an argument, who made the best argument, and they would get raises, and then there was a lot of talking about that. So we have to take all that into account. Now, the reason we're having a workshop here today is to discuss these differences, no matter how big they might be. If y'all are interested in a big change, this is the time to speak up.
If I
Well, I
could,
mean, we're
With
talking about
reclassification.
reclassification, yeah.
No, with reclassification. That's why I'm asking this question now, because later on, I don't want to keep having the workshops over the same thing over and over. If y'all are interested in a large change now with regards to reclassification, this would be the time to speak up.
Well, if you go to a performance-based pay scale, then the reclassifications don't exist anymore. You know, you basically take that off the table, but then you're putting a lot of ownership to that department head, to that elected official that has to sit there and determine those. You know, again, to your point, and like I said, there are a lot of counties that do it. And there's a lot of, I mean, it's how private does it, but you have a budget, and then you determine within your budget how much you're going to pay your own people.
And that's how union contracts get started.
because
And that's
because
why
what
I say
happens
contract
is
is right
that
there.
and so I think that the move away from that, just kind of going back and looking at some of the history on this thing from the county's perspective is that to try to keep it more fair across the board, because but you could have a secretary in your office that's making, and I'm going to use a number, but $20 an hour. But then Chris could say that she has a secretary in her office that's making $30 an hour, because that's what she determines in her budget that she wants to pay hers. And those two people are going to be a lot more upset about it, or at least one of them, than it is if there's some kind of a guideline set in place. And guidelines are just what they are. They're to try to keep some kind of a fairness across the board. Not that they're always right. I'll tell you that they're not always right. But when you're in any department, any industry, there's operator one, there's operator two, and I think that's kind of where we're maybe missing boat, to Commissioner Trahan's point earlier, is that we may need some more guides, some more lines in that guideline that we're following to kind of give that break. Because what really, at the end of what really people want, is more money. That's what they want. They want more money for working harder, for doing their job, and doing a little extra work, and we want to try to do that. But we've got to have that guideline set in place, and I don't think going back to, because number one, I'll tell you this, if we went back to a performance, we've got about 400 employees, give or take. To go to, if you kind of base it off of private sector numbers, Lori's, the Human Resources Department would have to have about 12 to 15 people to manage that on a performance base, because you have to document every single thing that you do that backs that performance up so that it's legal. And then so would I rather add 8 people to her or give you another individual to manage the stuff in your department? So
well, we used to do performance reviews, and it was based simply on the fact that everybody in the office could have up to a 3% raise, and that was what was budgeted. Period. You could review them. You could give them 1%. You could give them 1.5%. You could give them 3%, but you couldn't go above that. It wasn't a free for all, and I couldn't go over that. So it's not like I was given 3% of my entire payroll budget, and I could give it how I wanted. This person got 10%, and this person got whatever. It was managed. And so, but they were held accountable to you as an elected official or department head. You had a little leverage. And you reviewed them on their anniversary, if I remember correctly. It's been quite some time.
Performance
And-
reviews.
Pardon?
You did performance appraisals?
Right.
It was on their anniversary?
Gave them a performance, if I
Sorry,
remember. I might be wrong, but I think that's what it was. And then you recommended at that time, you had, I think, during the whole time, because I know I had one at one time that needed to improve their performance. So I told them I would review them again 3 months later and see if their performance had improved. And, then at that time, it was whatever they got. It wasn't, for me, a rubber stamp. The complaint was that sometimes it just was for some other departments. But you couldn't just take that money and divvy it up however you wanted, 10% to the one that you thought did the best or whatever. So sometimes they got 1, sometimes, like I say, 1.5, sometimes they got the whole 3% based on what their performance was. I don't remember if that lasted 1 or 2 years. It wasn't very long, and then it was wiped out. So it was allotted. I think it was kind of like a matrix. It was whatever was in the matrix was allotted from year to year. So it wasn't, like I say, a free-for-all. It was the only time.
yeah.
And just so y'all know, I brought that up for a particular reason. One of the reasons, the reason we're here today is to discuss reclassification. The system that we currently have, and we add 30 days to it or whatever it is not perfect. But I wanted to illustrate the point that nothing we do is going to be perfect. Everything we do is going to have some sort of repercussions that some folks are not going to like. So we need to be careful about that. We can do anything that the law allows us to do, and we can vote on it, and we can decide that. But you guys lived through it, and I have personally seen it, and that's why I looked over at the sheriff when I was talking about that. When you do a performance-based system like that, that brings in its own inherent problems, which is why you went to the pay matrix. Now, the idea of adding some classifications to it may be something that we can look at. I don't know if that's something that we need to, I mean...
I don't, in my previous life, we had some of the supervisors were going hunting fishing with some of their subordinates, and some of the guys thought that they got special treatment, but the one thing they didn't get was better pay because it was locked in. And thank goodness it was locked in, because that would have created a whole different situation.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's the reason that we're not doing performance-based.
Yeah, and we had the same problem with performance appraisals. I'll just give you an example where I used to work. We had three different kind of supervisors invariably, and this was civil service. One of them was the one that would actually sit down and have documentation, try to do the best. By the way, they don't do performance appraisals there anymore. Well, at least they didn't when I left. And they would try to do a good job. They usually caught the most heat. Then we would have the supervisor that didn't want to put a lot of time into it. The way the policy was written was you could exceed standards, below standards, and unsatisfactory. If you put down anything other than satisfactory, you had to justify it. They were really good because, they were really bad because. So the second type of supervisor went SSSSSSSSS, I'm not writing nothing, to everybody. And then the third supervisor was the extremist. They just gave, everybody was super wonderful and great, or everybody was horrible. And it got to the point where the performance appraisals weren't really useful because the supervisors weren't taking them seriously. And each one of these supervisors, bear in mind, they really thought they were doing a pretty decent job. You know, you'd have a supervisor, well, yeah, I get all S's, not because I'm lazy, but because, I mean, really, that's their job. He took 2 bullets. If he had taken 3, that would have exceeded standards. But 2 was, you know, that's his job. So, and they really believed this. It wasn't necessarily that they were bad people. And, yeah, we did have a couple, like you was talking about, that hunted and fishing with certain people. So, again, I wanted to illustrate the point that what we have here right now isn't perfect. But nothing that we do in this world is going to be perfect. What I'm trying to do today with reclassification is what can we do to tweak this or to change this so that it's more palpable to everyone, it's fairer to everyone, if there's anything we can do. Maybe there's not.
Yeah. Well,
one good possible solution that would take a lot of these away. Employees get a raise. And that's the one thing you can't guarantee because you don't know what the budget's going to be like every year. But after looking back at a lot of this, you had very few, if any, reclassifications when employees were pretty regular years ago, getting a 2% or a 3% raise or something. You very seldom. We went 3 years, I think, or 4 years with no reclassifications brought forward. They were there. And you could do it if you wanted to, but the employees were pretty much satisfied because they wanted to get some type of raise. And then, you know, just some hard times hit and wasn't able to do it. And then saw an influx of reclassification. I'm not saying they didn't deserve it. I'm not saying that they wasn't doing more work or more work was thrown on them by no means, but I just go by the facts. And that's what the facts show back then.
yeah. Well,
And one of the things I would really like to dispel from my department and many, departments is the fact that technology has relieved work or made it easier is really not true. And I know a lot of departments would agree because just to give you one example, if I could quickly, is let's say prior to technology, we got an appeal. We needed to send it to the Court of Appeals. We took the file, we put it on a copy machine, we hit copy, we let the whole thing run until we had a pile this big. We punched holes in it, we put brads in it, we put it in a box, we wrapped it up, we sent it in the mail, and it went to Beaumont to the Ninth Court of Appeals. Well, now that doesn't happen. It's now has to go through a portal. So we have to take it, we have to get each individual document make it into a PDF, name it because it has to be bookmarked, get them all set up into a folder in Word, and then once we get through with that, we have to take those PDFs, we have to get into Adobe Acrobat Pro, we have to bring them over there, be sure they're all bookmarked, have each one of them, then we have to run OCR to make it optical where it can be searched, then we have to run it through a Bates numbering, then we have to go back there and create these, cover pages and certification pages and do all of this. I mean, it's very time consuming to do all of that, as opposed to putting something on a copy machine, letting it run, putting it in a box and putting it in the mail. So if that's a very quick and brief and probably one of the easier things that we do, as well as with e-filing, it's causing us to do the work twice. We get it in an e-file, then we got to get it into where, our system is. So I would like to say that it has, but it has not. It has created and complicated things. And we used to have a couple of softwares. Now we're dealing with 6 and 7 softwares, and it's very complex. I've heard that a lot about the fact that, they shouldn't need that many employees. They've got all this technology. It has not alleviated, and it certainly hasn't alleviated the workload.
Well, you're right there. And we have had an agency locally that recently has fought an unfunded mandate, which is what that was. The state said you got to do X, and for X they had to reclassify people or hire new people, and they fought it. Now, I don't know exactly how it all went down because I wasn't privy to any of that, but I understand they did get some relief. One thing that I would recommend is that if we do have something that just seems completely overly burdensome to a local entity, I don't know yours, but I know yours, it sounds kind of similar. The racial profiling recordings, it used to be that the recordings were enough, and now it's my understanding that we're doing a long reporting procedure, and then that recently got cut back a little bit. Is something to that effect? If
I'm not sure.
when you make a traffic stop.
It's the same. It has increased.
Wrong.
And it used to be, we didn't even have to do it if you had video, right? And then they started adding these things. What I would recommend is if y'all have this problem and it's going to cause you to start reclassifying employees, asking for additional employees, if you really feel like it's being overburdensome, if you feel like it can be done a different way, if we can assist, if legal can assist, if we can write something up and send this to Austin, I mean, they're not going to. Only reason I mention this is because I got a whole host of other judges, commissioners, and so forth complaining on TAC on the website about these unfunded mandates. There's nothing wrong with us saying, "Hey, y'all are being a little bit over the top here." They'll probably say no, but you won't know until you push it.
I was going to share. I just did that. Last legislative session, I even brought it before the court, and they did a resolution because I have an unfunded mandate landed on me 10/1 of this year, running another software. Research Texas, whoever was here probably remembers that they did a nice resolution, and every county in the state of Texas did it. It went. We've had lobbyists. I've been there. I've testified. I've fought. Guess what? Did 0. I mean, it's a great idea. I'm not saying don't do it, but if they want it to go, the state of Texas, it's going to go. So that's, now landed on me as of 10/1 of this year. Unfunded mandates are killing us.
And they're killing counties across the state. And the
Exactly.
thing about it is that when they send those down there, just to what the term says is unfunded, is they're telling us that we have to do this stuff, and they're not
Exactly.
giving us the money
They
to do it.
don't care.
But yet we still have to do it.
Yeah.
But
And
for
then
the only place that we can get the money is from the taxpayer
Right.
here to change that, or we got to try to work within the budgets that we have, And I
Right.
mean, you made a good point, Sheriff. I mean, if we could, the years that we could do raises, I will tell you that we had, all good plans go astray as they do. But with our budget process that we did last year was to be able to have 4 to 5 years built into a plan, because you had asked for a plan last year of what our raises were going to be from 3 to 5% over the next 5 years. Okay, that was preluding Harvey. Harvey changed all of that, so we had to change our plan this year. I know that me and the judge had several discussions about raises this year and possible ways that we could potentially try to fix something, and we just couldn't figure out a way to do it without cutting out the operations of what we needed to do in the county. So we had to take a back seat this year. Our hope is that next year we'll see a recovery in that. I think that everybody wants to get back on track with being able to have a plan moving forward so that we can start doing raises again on a regular basis and not go several years without it and fix that. And hopefully that takes some of the reclassification stuff away. And but to the point of the reclassifications, I think we still have to have a guide. We need to look at that guide. We need to make some changes in it possibly. And we need to change that window so that we're having a little bit more time for people to work on getting those things in. And so that's kind of the two things I see, the biggest thing out of today so far. Yes, sir.
Commissioners and Judge, one thing that I would suggest that you really look at is right now, currently, the way the pay scale for most of the employees, with the exception of the Sheriff's Office, across the board, is you only see a raise in your matrix once every 5 years. Okay? And when you're talking with the economic times and the disasters that we've had, raises, I mean, when's the last raise that when's the last raise that the county employees have had outside the Sheriff's Office?
Last year.
Okay, all right. So they did receive one, and I'm faced with possibly losing an employee because she's realizing I wanted to have her reclassified. And basically, it's because of some of the same things that Ms. Edgerly has echoed. I mean, we're feeling the same effects because, we're having to comply with some of the things that she's having to comply with. Well, we didn't make it in time, so I sat down and I explained that to her, and then she started asking questions. She says, okay, so it's going to be, she just hit her 1 year mark. So it's going to be 4 years before I get a raise? And I said, well, I'm going to attack this again this next year, and be in on time this year.
Well,
but, I mean, I think that might be something that you could...
But can I ask a question, though, because it happened before me, and maybe, Laura, you can tell me, but I know we do longevity.
Right.
Okay, starting after 5 years?
Right.
Okay, and so in some world, that's considered a raise.
Right.
Because you're getting a change in pay scale every year once you get to 5 years. And so, I mean, I guess my question is what was the reasoning behind longevity when they instituted that? Because that was well before any of us sitting up here were here. So,
Well, it was before me. I don't know if
anybody
it was
can give
when the
some,
sheriff was
because
here, but
I mean,
I think that it.
because this is whenever I got here, that was the first I'd ever heard of something that was built in as an automatic every year. Okay, so, and I mean, I know it doesn't help in your situation because they're at 1 year.
You have to go back to the history.
Okay.
We used to do performance evaluations. That didn't work. My understanding, which I was not in this
Yeah.
job, was out of all the 400, there were 2 employees that didn't get 3%. Okay,
Yeah.
that's shocking that there are that many employees that are doing a perfect job.
And we have a report
Employees.
sheet that we have to
But-
take together
Yeah.
for positions. And so that lateral move was no such
I was going to say,
thing.
that
Well, but
performance
the
skills are very
matrix had
tough
so
to
many
do.
spots, and like you're talking, Dennis, and I forget how you moved along, but I think there was like 100 steps, and you would go, and then there was like, I don't know, the whole sheet was very small, but there was too many levels in it. That was the other complaint. So then when that committee was formed that Vicki and I was part of, and I think Christy or Becky was on that committee, that Virgie. So the whole deal in that huge committee, when we really redid and we kind of got to the matrix that we're on now, we took that into idea. How often, from an employer point of view, how long does it take you to learn your job to do it easily? About 5 years, you're feeling pretty good in it, hopefully. And then to the end of it, when do you quit learning in that? When that was kind of that 15-year mark that normal jobs, not all this new technology now and all that, but you get to that 15-year mark, well, how do you retain that employee? Longevity does. And that's always been, and when we redid the matrix, we redid longevity, where you got more the longer you stayed, which we didn't. So that was taken into consideration, and I agree with you that maybe what we have created needs to be tweaked, but I don't think that what we've created is bad.
Oh, no, I don't either.
think
I'm not
that
saying that.
we're
I
at
think it's a
point now
good...
that we could possibly do some changes with it, but I think to go backward and go back to that performance appraisal, I don't know about that. And as far as changing that 5-year interval of a raise, I think that's a good way for the budgeting portion of the group to understand that budget.
Well, my understanding that...
But you have a COLA raise, and you have a years of service raise, and that's where I think the sheriff touched on. We just don't get a normal yearly COLA raise.
And that's the problem.
And let's be
When you
cautious
have-
here.
the issue.
We be cautious here before we go further. Today, we're here discussing reclassification, not raises. So
Well-
I'm just trying to stay within the bounds of our item.
And that's just something, I just wanted to put that out there for you to think about, because,
Right.
you know, when you have somebody, if you're going 5 years without any type of a raise, you're going to tend to have people become more dissatisfied. You know, where if it was on I know 2.5 years, I'll just use that, if you had something right there in the middle, that's probably not, you know, maybe every 2 years or something. I know that throws some more steps in there, but at least somebody has to look forward to, you know, because heaven forbid we have something hit us again next year. Well, it may be another 5 years before we get a COLA.
Well,
So,
and
I know.
And like I said, I was just trying to get the handle on why the longevity raises were put into place, because that is a raise in terms of, because it's money, you're getting additional money to it. But to your point, 5 years is probably too long to wait. Maybe there's a way that we could go back and look at how we do that, and that we do that on a quicker time frame that it's built in. But that's going to affect what we do with raises long term. You know, as far as
But
that
I think
percentage.
also you get into the point, do you want to give somebody 2 years longevity, or could you take that money and give us a COLA raise for the entire county?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's only,
Well, that's
we
what I'm
all
saying,
know
you gotta
there's
break
only
it down.
that little bitty pot
Pile
of
of
money
money.
that you can talk about,
Little
and
bit.
it's the best way to get, and I think I heard that from all of y'all, what's the best thing that we can do
Yeah.
to get the majority of the people,
Affect the most people.
right, affect the most people?
And that's why these
You gotta
5
come
years, well, you're coming. The 5 years, that's the step. And like I say, 5 years is too long. That's where we should be doing COLAs and raises in between that. So that shouldn't be what everybody counts on as a raise. That's your step raise for being 5 years in that position, being better at your job. But we still should be giving raises between those 5 years in the form of COLAs. And unfortunately, like I said, we weren't able to do it last year. We did it the year before. But yes, people shouldn't sit there and look at that fine and say, there's no way I'm getting a raise in 5 years. That's not what that's designed to do. We should
Yeah.
be giving everybody COLAs in between those steps. That step is just, you've been there 5 years, you're doing a better job, so now you get a bump up and a step up.
Well, but I think there's something to be said, Lori, about, and you know, because you mentioned a minute ago, and Captain Marlowe, is that we have, if you got a person who comes here and they start tomorrow, and they work for a year and they've learned their job, they've done well, apparently they're still here, I think they deserve that step raise at that point, just like anybody else does, because each year they're going to learn more up to their step, and maybe we need to go back and
Well,
review
we
that a
did,
little
we
bit.
had that. So at 0. and
We had
then
0
got
to
a raise
1.
at 1 year.
And then we did away with that
And you
because
went
the starting pay
1
was
to
too
5.
low.
If I may, can I ask you all a quick question here? Because we're kind of gliding off topic here. Reclassification is a change in job duties. That's what we're here about today. Would you guys like a workshop on raises? We can certainly make that happen. We have ink and paper and
Well,
things.
I would like
Because
for
we're
us
getting
to-
kind of off of our
Okay.
our
And to
item.
your point,
At this year's budget, it makes no sense to do it anytime soon. But yes, I think at some point in the future, that probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
well, I would for sure like to have a workshop on our bucket classifications that we have currently, so that we can see if we need to add anything or change anything.
That's gonna take more
Okay.
than, that's gonna take a while to.
Yeah,
Because
well,
you
this is it.
do
So,
need to do it as a whole.
well, and I don't know that we need to revamp the entire thing, but I think there's some places that we need to have some additional
Well, do y'all want
line
to
items in
schedule
there.
something like that down the road, or do you want to just send something in to Bailey when y'all?
Yeah, let's do a little research first, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
Send it in
things like
whenever you're
Office
ready.
Manager 1, Office Manager
Yeah.
2, that could be a...
And that's where I was headed.
Yeah.
I think you want to be real careful about reducing that 5-year increment, because that's steps. That's something regular. You budgetarily, you don't want to say we're going to give raises every 1.2 years or whatever, because then you've got a budgetary implication that you've obligated yourself. Whereas we're talking about reclassifications. If you discuss the reclassifications from adding levels within positions, then you give yourself some options without over committing, over promising. I'm all about raises, don't get me wrong. Well, I am. But I think we're mixing up the
Yeah.
concepts, and I know it's very labor intensive. There's nothing I hated more was doing my resume or job descriptions, because putting down in words what people do is very difficult. But we also have to realize we have a general job description. We have major areas of responsibilities and then duties, and then some, of course, technologies change that, and it does make it worse a lot of times, because I've lived through that. When anything is end user driven, you just took on a new workload, because you have to make that advantage do what it needs to do every day. You have to live with the fallout of the different levels of tasks. So I'm not saying you want to get back to performance, because evaluation programs as a whole are faulty and flawed, but they're also a huge thing to implement. So it would be, that I would not want to jump into that at all. But maybe take into consideration an element in the reclass is not that you're doing just more volume, but it's a change in workload because of maybe the technology or the law or the regulation. So not just you're doing 12 more a day, but it takes this to get the job done. So that's a change in description that, if we have a compare and contrast from current job description, as hard as they are to write, and then what's the change? And then you've got something objective to look at for us. Can we objectively justify these changes?
Okay. So moving forward, we are going to look at positions on the matrix. Who would like to be y'all said you wanted to get some more information. Who wants to be the tip of the spear, send something in so we know when to have it on an agenda?
I guess.
I'm not looking at you, Commissioner Trahan, but
No, I know you're not.
Human resource guy.
I can feel everybody looking at me, yeah. So I guess that'll be me, and I'll get with Lori. We'll figure out what the timing needs to be.
No problem. Second question is, would this Commissioners Court like an agenda item regarding any changes, specifically the one we talked about here was the extra 30 days on the current policy as far as reclassification
Yeah, and
workshops?
I think we probably need to do that because we also need to update the changes from the stuff that we changed last year. So we need to have that voted on anyway, right, Lori?
Right.
So Lori,
we might
will you
as well.
send that in when you're ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anything else you guys got? Anything anybody else has?
Just be careful out there. It's wet.
Okay. I've got 11:26. Adjourned.